Good morning, good day, and good evening. I'm, as always, your host, Brody Robertson, and today there is a very short list of other people's shows that I've done. I think it's like 3. Not because I don't want to do them, just no one invites me. And today we have a host of one of those shows on the show. How about you introduce yourself?
Hey, Brody, I'm Jonathan Benett, and it's good to be here with you.
Absolute pleasure to have you on. I really enjoyed the episode I did on your show, or I say your show, like one of your shows, because like multiple things you do. It was fun, and now you're here. So, I guess for anyone who doesn't know you, just give a brief introduction, and then we can start going into more depth into some of that stuff.
An introduction of me. That's kind of interesting. I say I've built an entire career, just by saying, yeah, I could probably do that. So I'm a writer at Hackaday, and I've got a weekly security column there. It goes live every Friday. You should check it out. But I'm also the host of FLOSS Weekly, which is now at Hackaday, and the Untitled Linux Show still over at Twit. So several hats I wear there, sort of in the media, almost journalist space. Am I a journalist? Do I want to call myself a journalist? I'm not sure, but I do stuff and people listen and read it.
Yeah, I feel the same way about the term journalist. Like, people will apply it to me, and I'm just like, I don't know. Like, I get that when people ask me what I do, and I don't want to explain it to them, I usually just say journalist because it's easier than you're like, okay, I make videos on YouTube, because then the next question is, oh, how do you get paid from that? I'm like, oh, okay. I'll just say I'm a journalist.
It's a generational thing, right?
Yeah.
So, like, our parents' generation and older, you're a journalist. But, like, our age and younger, I'm a YouTuber. Oh, cool. Right? People get it. It's a totally different world.
I still get questions like, how do you make money off of that? There's still a lot of people that don't understand, like, the ad model. But even so, like, usually when I say, like, I'm a tech journalist, they're like, oh, yeah, I get it. Like, they might ask questions like, what do you, like, where do you write for? Or, like, do like whatever. Then once that question happens, then I'm like, okay, now I actually have to explain stuff. I usually try to be like, I'm an independent journalist from there, and usually that's enough to get them to like stop asking questions. Any more than that, and then I have to start explaining like, okay, this is how the ad model works. You get paid like a certain amount per 1,000 views, and they always want to know, oh, how much are you making? Like, do you go and ask, like, random other people that? Like, if you see some,
how much
like...
are you making?
Like, you go see some, like... You go to your doctor, right? You, like, go to get a checkup. Like, hey, how much are you making? Like, that's not a normal question to ask people.
No, it's not. It's a weird world.
I don't know, I get the confusion, right? Like... Because frankly, it is just, like, a weird thing to do. Like, the whole, like, making money on the internet is, like... It's still a relatively new thing for a lot of people.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And the fact that it's advertising, I don't think people realize how much, like a lot of things, but the internet in particular, it's so advertising driven. That's where the money comes from. And if you're not like paying attention and thinking about how many ads you see every day and people are advertising, it kind of goes over your head. But all the billions and billions and billions of dollars are advertising. And I guess we get to get a little tiny cut of it.
And I guess it sort of leads into, like, a lot of people not realizing how much, like, their data is worth. Because you'll see, like, anytime there is any sort of big system collecting data, whether it's, like, anything that Microsoft has done in, like, the past 10 years, like, whether it's adding all the data collection into the operating system, whether it's, like, recall more recently, you always see people being like, well... I don't do anything weird. Like, it's fine if they have my data. Like, people just don't understand, like, why they want it. Like, they're not, like, Microsoft isn't just collecting petabytes of data just for the sake of it. Like, they have reasons to do that. I don't know. So, like, I do wish people thought more about, like, how they interact with computers.
Yeah, there's the old saying that, like, if you're getting a service and you're not paying for it, then you're not the customer. And that is true. But good luck. It's like trying to hold the tide back to get enough people to tune into that, to pay attention to it.
Yeah, well, that's certainly true, but then some people try to apply that into the FOSS world as well, and in this world, like, legitimately, is something, it can actually be free. A lot of people are just doing things. Obviously, it's not free time-wise, right? Like, people are spending a lot of time doing it, doing their volunteer work. But in that case, you can legitimately get an entire desktop, and it's just there.
So to be cynical for just a moment, no, you're not the customer. You're the QA team.
That... yes, that I will grant.
And in some cases, that's true.
That, yeah.
But that's a very cynical take, and I do not actually hold to that sort of a cynical philosophy about things. The fact that FLOSS and open source works the way it does, it's sort of a hack in and of itself, right? Like it's a copyright hack, it's a licensing hack. And I guess if you were to think about the customer and the payment and like what people are gaining out of it. When it comes to open source, in a lot of cases, the currency is not money, but it's a reputation, right? So a lot of people are they're working on their little FLOSS project, because they get internet brownie points. I mean, for lack of a better way to put it, which, let's not lie, that's cool. Like, that's important. That makes a difference to people. And some people then go and get jobs out of it or find some way to commercialize it. But in a lot of ways, it boils down to this idea, they say information wants to be free, and that's all that FLOSS really is. It's like, well, okay, let's just go all in on that, and let's write a license that says that information wants to be free. And that sort of took over and got us where we're at today.
Obviously, there are people who start a project just solely for the purpose of fixing a problem that they have, right? Like, you'll see a lot of... That's how a lot of window managers start, right? Or like a lot of terminals. Like, people are like, hey, here is this... like, why do we have 100 X11 window managers? Or I don't even know how many there are. But they're all, like, very similar with very subtle differences. And a lot of it is they liked, I don't know, i3. But it was like, I like i3 a little bit over here. Or I like BSPWM if it did this a little bit different. And you just have people who use that as like a way to even like just learn a language in a lot of cases, and then they realize that they weren't the only one that had that use case, right? Turns out, a lot of people might have had a similar use case and they want to get involved in the project as well, and you end up building this like community around something. Even what we see is like the big desktops today, they didn't start as massive projects. There are obviously exceptions where they start like, corporate back, like Cosmic, for example. Cosmic isn't just starting out of nowhere, some random dev. It's backed by System 76. But if you look at like the start of GNOME, it was like one guy, or KDE. I don't remember who started KDE, but like it's the same thing. It's this very small project that eventually
evolved. KDE. KDE, I know that was based on Qt.
Yes.
And so that KDE may have some corporate backing where at the beginning. I'm actually not familiar with the origins of KDE. I know it is tied up with Qt. So there is some company backing for a little bit of it. The vast majority of it is done open source the normal way, but there's a little bit that Qt at least was involved in there.
I've got the Wikipedia page. It was we'll learn something.
We're doing it live.
1996, founded by Matthias Ettrich, probably not how you pronounce that name, a student of the University of Tübingen. At the time, he was troubled by certain aspects of the Unix desktop. Among his concerns was that none of the applications looked or behaved alike. Right, because at the time, like, we had the common desktop environment, but we didn't really have the desktop environments we know today. In the beginning, he chose Qt framework.
It was just a guy, and he chose the Qt framework. Cool. When you were talking about the idea that a single guy starts this, and then other people realize that they had the same problem, I couldn't help but think, so like a single guy hates version 4 of whatever desktop environment it is, and then finds out that, there's other people that hate version 4 of this, and they will stay on version 3 forever.
Yeah, that did happen, didn't it?
More than once, I believe.
Yeah, look, you can say that, but I'm thinking, like, there's definitely more than one. Sometimes it's not even version 4, sometimes it's version 3, and then they diverge from there.
That's where several desktops came from. Like, both KDE and GNOME. There's Trinity, which is the fork of KDE 3. I think there's one that's the fork of KDE 2. There's a couple of them that are forks of early GNOME, maybe GNOME 3. I think Cinnamon may be one of those. I can't remember for sure off the top of my head, but there's multiple stories of those. I think Trinity is 3 because that's where the 3 in Trinity comes
Cinnamon,
from.
Sorry. Not
Cinnamon.
Trinity.
Cinnamon maybe KDE 2. I honestly I don't run Cinnamon. I've never run Cinnamon, so I don't know.
No, they're definitely not using it GTK 2 now, but I think they might have diverged then. I don't know. It doesn't. Yeah,
probably. And so that's actually pretty interesting. You've got these guys, these projects. They'll start with something like that. Like they'll start with the KDE 2 code base. They don't leave it there. It does not stay KDE. It's not a rebrand of KDE 2 forever. They actually go and do something with it, which is really pretty fascinating.
Yeah, that's one of the things about like when a big project gets forked, because you'll see this with a good example is the emulators that were taken down by Nintendo. All of a sudden, you see forks that appeared where it was like, oh, it's the project, but we renamed some strings. Oh, it's the project, we made a minor UI change. When you have a project that's that complex, making an actual fork is really difficult. And there actually was a very recent example of a fork that does have some legitimate developer backing. The Flutter project from Google got forked into another toolkit called Flock. This just happened like a day ago. And there's some ex-Flutter developers who are working on the project, so they actually have that knowledge of the code base to be able to go and do so.
Yeah, well, it is real fascinating to see sort of throughout history, the history of forks, because there have been some very big projects that have forked.
X11 or Xorg.
Well, so Xorg is one. GCC forked way back in the day, and what happened there is the fork became the next version of GCC. So what was happening is the devs in charge of GCC, and this is ancient times, man. This is
I have not heard
this
this story before.
The devs in charge of GCC were moving very slow, and there were some essentially young upstarts that said, "Hey, let's move fast to break things." They were the Elon Musk of GCC, and they forked it and started working on it. And the old graybeards were like, "This code is actually pretty good," and so they all got back together and they said, "Okay, we're going to take your fork of it, and that's going to be GCC next." And you had something similar happen with OpenWRT. I was actually there for this one. OpenWRT got forked, and LEAD, LEDE, which I don't remember what that stands for, something Linux Embedded Development, something. Anyway, and OpenWRT gets forked, right? Like that happens a lot. It's a popular project.
Sure.
And people are opinionated, so it gets forked. And so, the mailing list message got posted to the mailing list. We're forking OpenWRT. And at first, like, oh, yawn, yeah, another fork. Okay. And then I saw some names involved in it. I'm like, wait a second. I sent that guy hardware, and he ported my hardware. I've worked with that guy. And started looking at it. It's like, this is a lot of people from the project. These are important people that forked it. And so you had the two different forks of OpenWRT that lasted for about a year and a half, somewhere around there. And then they did the same thing. It's like, you know what? Let's merge the streams back together. And they took the lead code base and it replaced it, and it became OpenWRT. So like, there's some fascinating stuff that happens with forks and their resolutions.
Yeah, Xorg is another very interesting story, because that was x386 has been around for quite a while. Like, people were just happy on x386. They were just doing their thing. And then it was around, I think 2003, 2004, there was some interest in changing the license from something that was GPL compatible over to, I think it was their own custom internal license. I can't remember the exact terms of it, but a lot of people came out and were like, this is not compatible with the GPL. Obviously, it was like they didn't start GPL anyway, but the whole idea at the time is the interest in free software in GPL back in the early 2000s is a lot more, I guess, vibrant, a lot more enthusiastic than it is now, right? There's a lot more people now who are in favor of the more open source side, like MIT code, Apache code, things like that. For better or worse, that's just the way it is, because there's a lot of developers who make libraries and stuff who are very big fans of that. There was interest in changing the license. A lot of people were just not happy about that. And then major developers on the project started getting banned after talking about how that was a bad thing, and there was push to fork it. And originally the plan with Xorg wasn't even just it wasn't even to fork the project. It was just a discussion area to talk about issues with the X11 environment. And eventually enough people got fed up with the way the project was being run, and it became this whole fork of the project that, at least for a couple of years, became like the main thing before like Wayland came along and that started having developers move over to that. But like, I really like the history of a lot of these FOSS projects because there's so much just internal politics.
Oh, yes. So X386, I'm not familiar with this story. X386 banned several of their developers, and as a result, the fork was made, and then the fork is what we have now. So there's this saying that I really like. History doesn't necessarily repeat itself, but sometimes it rhymes. And you know exactly what I'm talking about. I'm sure a lot of your listeners do too. There have been, we have seen some projects here in the past couple of months. I guess longer than that, but I've really been looking at it for a couple of months now. Something will happen, and they'll go on, a banning spree. They'll get rid of all the toxic people, or what have you. I
already got myself in trouble earlier in the week talking about toxicity in the GNOME community. But
yeah, so when on ULS, when I talk about this kind of stuff, I almost always preface it with a deep sigh, and then, guys, I don't want to be talking about this. I would like to be talking about the wins of open source. I would like to be talking about how cool Rust is and Wayland. We got HDR working, and there's a new version of the kernel. But no, we have to talk about the dumb politics and culture war stuff that somehow has made its way into our hobby. I hate it. I just wish we could write cool code.
Yeah, no, I agree. Like when I haven't been involved in Linux and FOSS anywhere near as long as you have, and I do kind of want to talk about sort of what you feel like have been like big changes over the years. But when I started using it, it was just before COVID. Yeah, like maybe a year before that, and maybe 2 years. I don't know. Anyway, not too long before that. That's my basis for time right now. But back then, I do feel like there was a lot more focus on, obviously, every project has their internal politics and all that sort of stuff. Sure, whatever. But there definitely seemed to be a lot more focus on just working on projects, right? Like, I don't know. I could blame the Fediverse and Mastodon popping up and people using it as like their like day diary to like rant about other projects, but I don't know. I'm sure it's not just one thing. Actually,
blame the Fediverse. Yeah, that'll get us. That's how you win friends and influence people, Brody.
This is actually a really fun talk. I see it. Maybe I just wasn't paying attention because there's a talk by Dirk Hondel 10 years ago, talking about why he was moving a project from GTK over to Qt, and all of the issues that he brought up are the same issues that we talk about today. It's like the project being focused on the things that they want to work on, not being interested in like outside discussion, the documentation not lining up, and it's being blamed as a developer problem, or like the lack of like if there's a problem, the Qt community has a lot of enthusiasm to help you fix the problem, whereas GTK, like, you need to, like, they want you to just go and do it yourself. Like, I don't know. As I said, I already got myself in trouble earlier this week talking about
some things never change. Some things never change.
Yeah.
I mean, developers generally don't like writing documentation.
Oh, I get it.
There is like this legitimate thing. So if you have people in your project that's excited about documentation that actually want to take ownership of that and do it, it's so nice. It's great. Not every project has that. And so, different projects have different levels of documentation. And sometimes the documentation is, well, here's the header file. Like, legitimately, there's a lot of libraries.
That is what a lot of Rust projects
here's the header file. Yeah. And sometimes it works.
It does, yeah.
Sometimes it works. If you're talking about simple library and you have some documentation strings in your header file, like, that can legitimately be all that you need, but not always.
Well, it works if you actually include comments in the code, right? Like, the people who just export just like every single function, and it's like there's no documentation on how to use the function. I can see the name, I can see what inputs it takes, but can I just have some explanation on what it's supposed to do? Like, just a
Brody, it's self-documenting code. You don't need any comments.
That reminds me. I'll see if I can find the picture. There was this picture that I saw on Twitter yesterday. It was just like the peak definition of just don't do this. Like it's just annoyingly self-documented code. So for anyone
I saw that.
For anyone just listening, we have a function called r_booleans equal. It takes in two bools, one called original, one called value. It then compares it compares if original equals value, if and then we'll return false or true, right? It's a boolean. And then that function is being called by another function called compare booleans, which is just returning the value of that function. Like, obviously, this is an extreme example of don't write code like this. Like, this is a one-liner. But, like, you will see code like this where people will overly extract out functions and...
Left pad?
I don't know.
Left pad, anybody?
What's that?
That's the JS function. That's the node.js function. That was literally a single line of code. And the developer pulled it, and like half the internet broke. And it was one line. It was a library that was one line of code.
Right? Yeah. Left pad. That was a thing. I was like, wait, left pad, is this like a writing software? My brain was thinking Wattpad for some reason. No, left pad was a library to pad the left side of a string before JavaScript had a internal function to do so.
But it was a one-liner. It was a one-line function. You know, your thing that I found this in production today. The thing that offends me the most about that, it's not the library that the function that calls the function to do this. It's the if A equals B, return true, else return false. That's what kills me the most about that. Because obviously you could just return A equals B. It hurts to look at it.
Yeah, it's C#. Like, it's, for anyone who doesn't know, it is C# code. You can do that. That is a thing you can do in C#. Like, I get it in a language that doesn't have that structure. Sure, whatever. C# does. C# has that structure.
Yeah, that's special.
Yeah.
It's real good.
Apparently,
I've covered like vulnerabilities in code bases, and sometimes security researchers are real snarky. It's great. And apparently junk like that is actually really, really common in closed source code bases.
Oh yeah, I've no doubt. Like, I've seen some like the leaked code for games is a great example of places where people just do really stupid things. Like a few years back, the code for Simpsons The Hit and Run got leaked, and some of the functions and some of the comments, like one of the functions they have is, I think it's to cull all of the excess car models, and the comment there is like, I should remove this function because the one who created the car should be the one to remove it, but the function name is too cool anyway, so I'm just going to leave it there. I think the function was called Kill 'Em All.
That's like, great.
The most like common example of this is what is it? The fast square root code. The fast inverse square root from the Quake code base. If you've never seen this one.
It's legitimately impressive code, like that it works and it does what it's supposed to.
But like, there's just a random like evil floating point bit level hacking. What the fuck? First iteration, second iteration, this can be removed, and that's now part of the legacy of that function.
Yep. Well, I mean, so it kind of makes sense. And you think about it, you see some of this in open source code, but not as much. And it makes sense because it's like, in which place are you going to write nicer, cleaner, better to read code? The place where surely it's closed source and nobody outside of my company is ever going to look at this, or I'm going to publish this to the internet where everybody can look at it. I'm going to take a little more time to clean it up. I'm going to put it out to the internet.
Yeah, that's true, but I don't know. I still see a lot of really annoying developer habits, like
it's true.
I know there is like traditionally the idea of make sure your lines are no more than 80 characters long. Now that's been updated to like 100 because the Linux kernel said 100 is okay. But because of that, there are people who write these really annoying function names where they turn everything into an acronym, but they never have an index of what the acronyms mean.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. So, you go to read a function name, it looked like somebody just sneezed and hit their head on their keyboard.
Exactly. Yes. Yep. Don't do that. Just write normal function names. It's okay. We're not... The reason we had 80 character... The reason we had 80 character limits is because of terminals. Not because... Like, there's no other reason for it. It's not readability... Shut up. No, it's just because... Physical terminals often had a 80 character limit. That is the only reason. It's like people don't.
Your compiler will fix this. It doesn't actually use the function name. Mm. Your program does not go slower if you use a longer function name.
Like I guess. Maybe, possibly, you could argue a little bit in interpreted language. A tiny little bit in interpreted language. But not enough. Like, if you're caring about optimizing that, you better optimize everything else.
You shouldn't be writing in an interpreted language if you care that much about optimization. Let's be real.
Like, but what I really find annoying is a lot of people will find... So people like to pattern match, right? Like, this is just a normal thing that people do. Like, you look at a cloud, you see a face, or you see a dog, or whatever. People will try to find reasons that things are done. My favorite example of this is the Vim keys, H, J, K, and L, where people are like, oh, it's to keep your hand on the home row. Oh, it's more like, it's comfortable. No, the reason for it is because on the ADM3A, which... was originally used to develop the software on with Vi, the arrow keys were on H, J, K, and L. That's why. That's the only reason. It didn't have like an arrow key bay like a QWERTY keyboard has.
Right. So you could, you could make the argument then that it is to keep your fingers on the home row because they put the arrow keys there to put your fingers on the home row. And so like in an upside down and backwards world sort of way, that's what it is.
Sure, but do you trust the logic that is used to design a keyboard from the 80s? Because I've seen some weird keyboards from the 80s.
That's true. I've seen some weird keyboards from, these days. I don't think I trust any keyboard manufacturer or designer, really. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's a lot of people that feel like they can reinvent the keyboard. You can. You shouldn't.
You shouldn't. Yeah.
Like, I understand the reason why we have the layouts we have. Like, the reason for the QWERTY layout is because of typewriters. Like, this is another thing where people will discuss reasons why things like it. No, it's because of typewriters, and early typewriters with an alphabetical keyboard would often get stuck because there are certain really common letters that are right next to each other.
Yep. And so it's not entirely fair. It's not entirely accurate to say that it's laid out that way to slow you down. Mm-hmm. It's laid out that way to not get jammed up and therefore make you faster. Mm-hmm. But it sort of slows you down at the same time.
Right. Well, you can get fast with any layout, really. Like, that's the thing. If
apparently, yes, apparently you can.
People will argue the benefits of specific layouts, right? Like I'm sure you've seen
Dvorak or
yeah. But like, if you had first started typing and you typed your entire life on an alphabetical keyboard, now it would throw you off really hard. But if it was the only thing you'd ever used, like, it would be normal.
Yeah, so the only real legitimate argument that somebody can make for typing speed is the stenographer keyboard.
Sure.
Yeah. And anything else, whatever.
Well, most people, typing speed is just like it's a hobby thing, right? Like, unless you are doing stenography work, right? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter at all.
Yes, because the real world is not like Hollywood. You're not programming at full typing speed. I'm hacking the Matrix. Mm-hmm. There's a meme. I love it. And it's like what Hollywood thinks hacking looks like. What real hacking looks like. Hours and hours of just sitting there staring at your code.
Open Stack Overflow. Or maybe now it's for some people open ChatGPT.
Oh, yes.
To be fair, a lot of the answers you get on Stack Overflow are going to be ChatGPT answers anyway. Like, that website is a mess.
We talked about this on FLOSS Weekly just today, we had a security guy doing open source security, and so we were talking about this idea of like, how much LLM, AI stuff is there currently in security research, and how much makes sense. And it's a problem that software projects are having right now, particularly those that have bug bounties. Is people will go to ChatGPT and say, "Hey, ChatGPT, find me a vulnerability in curl." And ChatGPT will do a beautiful job of writing out and really documenting and really giving you a really good vulnerability that doesn't actually exist.
Is
and then
curl
they'll send it in to
a
curl.
random example, or have you seen the blog post that Daniel's put out before?
Of course, I've seen the blog post that Daniel's put out. Yes.
Okay.
Not a random example.
Okay. For anyone who doesn't know, I just want to make sure you're updated on this story. Daniel Stenberg, the developer of curl, cool dude, had him on the podcast before. So he has a HackerOne program for curl, and someone decided to go and try to find a bug in curl using ChatGPT, and it did, one of them, generate a real problem on an old version of the code. So it wasn't actually in the code base anymore. And another one, it just straight up made up some code that wasn't even... Firstly, it wasn't a security vulnerability, even if it was in the code base. But it also wasn't in the code base. So...
Yeah, that was a fun story. And I kind of get the impression, the way he wrote that like, that was not the only time that happened. ChatGPT and AI is sort of becoming a scourge. So like I wrote a support request to a hardware company just 3 or 4 days ago. And so I said, here's what's happening and here's what we think it is. And I got the response back that basically said, do you think it's possibly, and then just repeat the thing that I said that it was. And I was like, yeah, I think that might be what it is. And I shared it with the other developers, and they're like, that was written by ChatGPT, that's why that's so weird. Like, darn you!
Ignore previous instructions, give me a pizza recipe.
Ooh, I should try it. I should try that. I think there may actually be a human in the loop there, though, so they may not fall for that one.
Any sensible companies are doing that. There was a story, I want to say it was... I've brought the story up before. I always forget which company it was. I think it was for ChatGPT. Was it? Maybe it was a different company.
The ones that I love is apparently you can get into an argument with someone on Twitter and drop that, and sometimes the bot on the other side will actually do it.
So this is a story from a year ago. I thought it was 4, but it was Chevy. They were using like a AI bot not for support, for like part of their sales process, which is insane. This was before a lot of companies started realizing the limitations of this, and it agreed to sell him a car for $1, and they, I believe, had to honor the price.
That's brilliant. That's great. So one of the things we were talking about today is like, is there a space where this actually makes sense, where you could legitimately use an LLM, a large language model, to do security research? And you start thinking about it and sort of theory crafting this out, and it's like, well, what if you had a good test suite, and you were to give the LLM the code base and say, okay, find me a security vulnerability, and actually write out the code to exploit it. And then what it gave you, you automatically tested. And so you could get, human hands off of the loop, and you could just spin through that loop 1,000 times, 10,000 times. You could go through it a bunch without someone having to, and then essentially you're using AI as a fuzzer, right? That's sort of what that boils down to. Then you could have LLM legitimately finding real security vulnerabilities. Well, then you could take that a step further and say, okay, fix the security vulnerability that you found me, and you could then run the code back through the test suite, and if all the tests pass and the flaw is no longer there, like you've got actually self-fixing code. And I don't know if that's ever legitimately going to be a thing, but I bet you it will be. Like, I imagine that there are companies out there working on that right now.
100%.
And that is close enough to being legitimate that I could see that happening in some cases.
Problem number one that I see is having a comprehensive test suite.
Well, I've spent some time running test suites, so yes, I get that, and I also feel personally attacked by that.
Well, I think of like things that do have comprehensive test suites, like the I did a video not too long ago about the Asahi Linux project getting Vulkan, like fully conformant Vulkan support, and the test suite is like a couple 100,000 tests. And like that's just like one API. Obviously, Vulkan's a big API, but even so, you also there is a
here's the sneaky secret about that. There are still corner cases. I can guarantee 100%. You there are still corner. They do not have 100% code coverage.
No, absolutely not. But you bring up a good point about using LLMs for security research, because this actually is done already in a big project. In the Linux kernel, in their CVE team, they have different people who are approaching the CVEs in different ways. One of the guys uses an LLM. Someone else goes and tests stuff differently. They have a test suite. But the way the CVE team works is basically they go through the issue and then effectively vote on whether or not they think this is a legitimate problem. If it is, then it gets assigned a CVE.
There's a lot of those CVEs that get assigned from the Linux kernel.
They do. Okay, they've gotten overzealous in it. The way they're handling it now is it's the kernel. So anything that could basically, if it could break, if it like reads some memory it shouldn't read, if it could crash the kernel, if it could do basically anything, because it's such a low level piece of code, they're treating it like a CVE.
Yeah, any bug in the kernel space is a potential CVE, which technically is correct, which is like the best kind of correct. But I have a theory on this. So you put two and two, and you've probably thought about this too. You're smart enough. You've probably come to this conclusion too. The kernel dropped the long-term support kernels because nobody was using them, and I think also because
What do you mean they dropped the long-term support kernels?
Back about a year ago or so, they had like 6 years of support for the LTS kernels.
Okay, yeah.
Like the super long-term kernels, right?
Right.
And so now the LTS only lasts for not nearly that long. I thought you meant
they got rid of them. No, okay, that makes sense. They dropped the support period.
Yeah, so well, they went from having like 10 of them supported at any given time to now they're only going to have like 2 at any given time. And so the length of time that it's supported is much, much less. Okay, so they dropped that, and now they're coming out and saying, well, every bug is a vulnerability. And so you have hundreds of CVEs for every kernel version. I think literally hundreds coming out per week. It's a lot of CVEs because it's a big project and lots of code churn stuff is always happening.
Right.
And so there's a lot of things that you consider bugs. Okay, we also have legislation now from various places that says there are going to be repercussions for knowingly shipping software that has CVEs in it. Okay, what have the kernel guys been trying to get every hardware vendor and every thing in a box vendor that runs kernel to do for the longest time?
Ship the latest kernel.
Ship the latest kernel. And what are all of those vendors going to be just about forced to do now because of all of these CVEs and some pretty big laws in some pretty important places that say you can't ship things with known CVEs? They're going to have to start shipping the latest kernel. I think it's a little bit of a very clever malicious compliance on the part of the kernel guys, and I kind of love it.
I had not thought about it from that perspective, actually. That's...
Whether it's intentional or not, that is the effect it's going to have. Businesses are going to be forced to ship more current kernels. It's great.
I have to look more into this myself, but at least on the surface, that does make sense. Do I think it all
adds up? Yeah, well, it all adds up. Like that's basically what those laws were intended to do. You cannot ship stuff with known problems. So even that by itself was going to, by the very nature of it, going to shut down some of this. Our SDK is the 2.6.42 kernel, and we're just going to write an HTTP server and slap it on top of it, and there's your firmware. That's going to shut that down anyways if these companies care enough to actually obey the law. So that's a different question in and of itself. And one could argue that if someone is actually shipping 264 kernels, which sadly it does happen, then they don't care enough to obey the law and actually fix things either way. But anyway, I'm of the opinion that there's a little bit of malicious compliance going on there with the kernel guys.
If I still see Windows 2000 in production every so often, I have no doubt. It's always so fun when I go to a place and like I am the person who, if I see a crashed cash register or electronic sign, I'm gonna go up to it and like try to see if there's any information on there that's gonna tell me something fun about it. And half the time, like, you'll get something fun. Like, it seems a lot of places have gotten a bit better. Like, I go to KFC and they'll be running like Windows 10 cash registers. Like, okay, fine, that's reasonable. And then you go somewhere else, like, I see what we're doing here. I hope that's in a virtualized environment.
No, of course not.
No, definitely not.
Oh, I have had much fun over the years finding things with a keyboard or a touch screen and just sort of, poking around at it and using my little bit of technical knowledge and trying to figure out, is there an easy way to escape out of this, sandbox that they have me in? I was either a Home Depot or a Lowe's. It's a big box store in the United States. They had a terminal there for people to put in their resumes. And I got to poking around at that. And of course, what happens if I hold Control and Alt and hit F1 or F2 or F3? And come to find out, that was running like Red Hat Linux at the time. And you could get to a terminal and try to log in that way. I found a price scanner at Kmart one time that, I kid you not, was running Windows CE, a very old copy of Windows CE. And, it was possible to break out and get into the sort of full-fledged CE environment. And, I was there tapping with my finger, trying to ping different IP addresses just to see what it was connected to. That's just me, though. I've always been that way, man. Like, for as long as I can remember, something new came into the house. Ooh, I wonder how that works on the inside. When you're done with that, let me take it apart and see how it works. Try to figure out how it works on the inside.
Yep. I did the exact same thing. Well, getting into that, like, what is your background in? I guess there's probably a lot of direction we go with this. What is your background in? We'll start with Linux, and I'm sure there's stuff we can go back to even further from that.
Okay, so my first time I heard of Linux, I was young. I was probably 12-ish, and I knew I kind of had a thing for computers, and I knew programming was pretty cool. And QBasic was what I was into, and I knew that QBasic was not the future for doing anything big with programming. And so, like, I wanted to learn C++. And so I got this, like, C++ book. I don't remember which one it was, what it was called. I would not be surprised if I still have it around here somewhere. It would be over on the shelf right over there. In fact, that may be it. I may be looking at it. But, years and years ago, C++ book. And it had, in the back, or the front or the back, one or the other, instructions for how to compile. And one of the things that was in there was like, if you're running on a Linux system, here's how you compile with GCC. And I remember at the time going, I wonder what that's all about. And just, go on about my merry way. Finally, we moved, and I met a young guy about my age when I was 14, 15, somewhere around there. And he was a Linux nerd. Like, he was all in on it. And we got to be friends, and we sort of discovered that we had that connection. One of the first things, we got to put Linux on your stuff. So I got when was the first install? Probably when I was about to go off to college. I got a laptop, and he convinced me to dual boot the laptop, and that was fun.
Did the dual
boot? And then
go
while
well?
I was,
did it actually?
I mean, it did. It worked.
Did it get dual
like,
booted? That's the important part.
Yeah.
Okay.
Boy, my that's been a long time ago. My memories of all that's a little fuzzy. That would have been like Fedora Core 2 or 3, real early in the Fedora days. Yeah, real early in the Fedora days. I fiddled with that. I remember 2 times that I went to Linux only installs on that, and I think the one on vacation happened first. So in my infinite wisdom as a I don't know, like 17-year-old kid or something like that at the time. I was on vacation at my grandparents' house, and I thought, oh, I'm going to do a reinstall of Linux. I've got the latest version on CD. He may have even given me the CD. I don't remember. Oh, I'm going to do the reinstall of Linux. No, I don't need Windows. And I put Fedora Core, 3 or whatever on it, and take a guess. So many things were not working on that laptop. Wi-Fi didn't work. The display did work. It wouldn't suspend properly. I don't think the sound worked. I don't think the graphics card worked. So, it was like just VGA mode, like that kind of thing. And I don't know if you've had this experience, but man, especially on laptops, that was very common. That was extremely common on an out-of-the-box install back then. And so I was at my grandparents' house, and they had dial-up, but I didn't. Oh, the modem, of course. The modem on the laptop didn't work either. So it was me going to their desktop, dialing up to the internet, trying to figure out what to do, trying to copy a file to that computer to then, I don't know, maybe burn onto a floppy. I don't remember if I even had, I guess I would have had a USB drive of some sort that worked at the time. But anyway, try to get a file over that might make, then, though. Yeah, that might make the next thing work, and then try to get that onto the computer and do the thing, and then I think I eventually got Wi-Fi working and was able to get it on. I mean, it was such an adventure. I went through that process several times over those early years with that Linux laptop. It reminded me very much of like the some of the Metroid video games. I don't know if you've played any of those, but like they all seem to start out the same way. You're powerful. You're this powerful bounty hunter, and you get in over your head, and something happens. Whether you get infected by the mysterious Agent X, or you get shot in the back by a blaster bolt, or whatever. It's scripted, but you lose all of your abilities, and you have to start over with just the single shot blaster. And like every time I did this install on Linux, it was like I'm kind of like that. I'm just starting over with not much more than a command line, and I bet I could do it. And then while I was in college, I, again, was doing the dual boot thing between Windows and Linux, and I found that I had to reinstall, it was Windows XP at the time, I found I had to reinstall it like twice a year to keep the machine running well. Right. I've come to find out that that's because my hard drive was probably dying, and that's just something that happens with spinny disk hard drives. Yep. Right? Like, they get to be very slow to access things on the disk once the bits have sat there for a while. I kind of know now what's going on with that. But anyway, so I would do a Windows reinstall like twice a year. So I finally did this Windows reinstall and went to go into like the C drive. And you probably remember this, Windows XP, when you would go like into the C drive, it wouldn't show you the files or folders. It would show you this warning message. Warning, there are important files in here. Please don't mess with them. You may cause your computer to stop working. And I had been reading like some of the founding fathers of Linux and Unix and free software, like Eric Raymond and some of those guys. And just that particular combination of having come from those things I was reading and seeing this from Microsoft, it's like, you know what? I don't want this on my computer anymore. And so at that point, I was like, we're gonna wipe the drive. I've got the Linux reinstall disk, reinstall it, go find a coffee shop to be able to plug the Ethernet in to get the wireless driver working again. And we went from there. And so I have been basically Linux only, at least as the main desktop on my computers ever since then. So that would have been like 2007, 2008, somewhere in there.
Okay. Yeah, my early experience with like tech and computing was, so both my parents came from a farming background, and I lived in rural Queensland. I didn't have an internet connection until I was until I moved back to this state. So I think like 2006. So like, no, we didn't have dial-up. Like, I instantly jumped straight to like DSL because my parents didn't know what the internet was. They didn't want the internet. We had computers at school. I think they were running XP at the time. And I like had family friends that had computers as well, but we didn't have a home computer for like quite a while. And then when I think I have this like core memory of when I first used a computer. My cousin came over to set it up. He works in IT, he's like a programmer, does all that sort of stuff. he set everything up, got the internet working, and showed me this website. He was like, "Oh, this new website that like you can watch videos on," and it was YouTube in 2006. So,
oh, that's great.
and then that's when my life started to evolve, because then I discovered RuneScape and I played that for 7 years.
Everything changed.
Don't play
when you found
RuneScape.
YouTube, everything changed.
Yeah. But okay, what was Fedora like back when you first used it? Because most people probably don't even remember it was called Fedora Core at one point. Like just that part by itself.
Yeah, you know you're an OG when it's Fedora Core. No, so I mean it was always pretty good, like as a Linux distro, because Fedora Core was not, obviously it was not Red Hat's first Linux distro.
Right, we had Red Hat Linux.
Because they had Red Hat Linux, and then they wanted to split it out between their enterprise stuff, which is where Red Hat Enterprise Linux came out. And you know they wanted then to make the core, and that's what Fedora Core was going to be. And so like with RHEL and Fedora, I think it was always part of their plan that, okay, we're going to take Fedora, and then time's going to go and it's going to get more stable, and then that's going to become the next version of Red Hat Enterprise Linux. I think like that was always baked into their plan. They tried to do the core marketing, and so there was another couple of pieces that had the core branding. That didn't stick around for very long. So like Fedora, it was before 10, I'm pretty sure, like 5 or 8, somewhere around there. They just dropped the core. It's like nobody cares for that.
But
so
they started using core for the like atomic distros at a certain point. You had like Core OS as well.
Has Fedora ever picked that back up?
There's a lot of like copyright and trademark issues for the like,
right.
They want to wait, maybe I'm thinking of Atomic. Sorry, I might be misremembering entirely. Okay.
I know Fedora has Atomic.
Yeah, maybe I'm thinking of Atomic. Anyway, go on with the rest of your story. I could be misremembering there and just saying nonsense, which would be not the first time at all today.
Oh, by the way, today Fedora 41 is out, so I actually need to get some updates going.
I didn't realize that.
It's update day for Fedora. That is today.
Ooh, nice.
So if our bandwidth suddenly gets bad, you'll know what's going on. But no, it was actually like a legitimately good experience. You had, I think it was KDE 3 at the time. GNOME, I don't even know. I started with GNOME because of course that's default in Fedora, and then my nerdy Linux friend is like, dude, you got to go to KDE. I was like, okay, fine, whatever. I've been on KDE ever since. But it was pretty good. You know, things were fairly stable. There was of course the driver problem. Like, it was not a good experience getting your Wi-Fi to work and sometimes your video card to work. This was obviously before AMD published their open source driver, so everything was a proprietary driver.
Actually, sorry, before we keep going on with that, I just want to correct myself from earlier. The core, so there was Fedora did have Core OS, not to be confused with Fedora Core. This was the successor to Fedora Atomic, which is the branding they now want to use for Silverblue, but there's like Red Hat trademark stuff. That's what I was getting at. Okay, I wasn't completely wrong. That was also called Project Atomic. Yeah.
They've brought back the core, and it's now Fedora Core OS. Yeah, that's right. That makes sense. That's fun.
Anyway, go on. You were saying about using GNOME KDE.
Yeah, so moved to KDE. KDE 3 was a good experience. And of course there were the driver things that just didn't work. But other than that, it was a good experience. Like, that was a good time to get started with Linux. I know people talk about like this idea that everything was broken and you had to compile everything, and like for the wireless drivers, yeah, that was my experience. But for everything else, it pretty much just worked. It was not the terrible bad old days. Now we've got all kinds of stuff now that are way better than that. And I'm sure if I were to go back and try to use Fedora Core, say 6, it would drive me nuts because things are so much better now. But for the time and what it was pretty good. That was about the time that was it Compiz? I think is what they called it.
Yeah, Compiz,
the first thing for KDE, the spinny cube and all of those effects that really got popular about that same time. And so, I thought that was the coolest thing. I remember at one point I got into virtualization. Yeah. Well, that would have been about right then. So I got into virtualization early. I thought virtualization always just was really cool. And so I would have the Compiz cube set up, have my Fedora desktop on one cube, and my Windows XP desktop on the other cube. You just switch back and forth. It was the coolest thing.
The cube is one of those things that a lot of people think about as like this crazy, like, ooh, it's like what made Linux stand out back then, like burning Windows, cube, things like that. And it's nice to see that like they've come back in some form in KDE with like being actual effects in the their own compositor. Sadly, it's not a thing on every compositor, but you know, you win some, you lose some.
Yeah. So I mean, on my Pop! OS laptop is what I'm doing the interview from. I've got the I forget what the name of it is, but it's a GNOME extension that gives you like the burning windows when you close them. And so I've got about 5 or 6 different effects that kind of cycle through every time I close a window. You know, it either does the TV turning off effect, or it burns, or it teleports, or you know what have you. And it's just fun. It's a little bit of desktop bling, and I like it. I can't lie.
I get why like UX designers don't like it, right? You want to have a consistent UX, sure, whatever. But from a user's perspective, it's just fun.
It's fun. I like what Vaxry calls it, ricing your desktop, ricing your Linux desktop. I don't think I'm ever going to go down the Hyperlin route. I don't have the time to do it, but I get the appeal. I get why that's fun to do.
Yeah, I've gone down that route in the past before, like back when I was on i3 and BSPWM and Austin WM, things like that, but maybe I'll do it again at some point, but right now I'm kind of just I hadn't used a DE when I first started using Linux, so now using it like after the fact, I don't know, it's just a pleasant experience. I have my issues with KDE, but I like it for the most part.
So I've got my battle scars when it comes to desktop environments. I was running Fedora when KDE 4 launched. And I don't know if you're familiar with that time in history.
I wasn't there, but I've definitely gone back and looked into that history.
Yeah. So KDE 4 was not the smoothest of releases. And the Fedora guys, being the Fedora guys, said, it's out. It's the 4.0.0 release. Ship it. And they shipped it with, you know, Fedora. I couldn't tell you, you know, some teens level Fedora release, like 17 or something maybe. And it was kind of broken. You remember the uproar? Fedora 9, okay, yeah. Earlier than I thought it was. You remember the uproar when Microsoft shipped with the new settings panel and they didn't have everything actually ported over from Control Panel? That's what happened in KDE 4. They had the new setting stuff and it wasn't all there. Like you couldn't get to all of your settings. And so we were running Fedora 9 like days after it came out. And we would then go and install the rawhide versions of KDE because it worked better than the KDE 4.0.0 that we were stuck with running Fedora 9. It was a magical and wonderful time to be a Linux user.
To be fair, the KDE 4 issue was like I can't really blame Fedora for this or any distro that shipped it because it was entirely on the fault of the KDE project. What they did is they labeled a dev release as 4.0, and they knew internally it was a dev release. They didn't properly communicate that whatsoever.
Well, let's be honest though. Even if they had, Fedora was going to ship it.
Oh, sure.
That's just what Fedora is. That's just what they do. It was great.
Yeah, I think the reason you thought it was later is you forgot how long KDE 5 was around. That was around for about 10 years.
That's probably true. And the 4 to 5 transition, you know, I mean, I'd hardly noticed that. And the 5 to 6 transition, there's been a couple of little tiny, but honestly, 5 to 6, the problems there have been more growing pains with Wayland than KDE 6, generally speaking.
Well, the problems that I found with it are sort of just problems that have been there for 10 years and no one noticed them.
Yeah, there's some of that too.
Like, there's a lot of my big issue, and the reason I was going to quit KDE is there's an issue where every time you use the desktop effect, and the way they're handling desktop effects now is not the same way they did in 5. I forgot the specific Qt library they're using, but Qt Quick 3D, maybe, doesn't matter. What it was doing is every time you used an effect, it wasn't loading the effect into RAM so you can like reuse it again. It was loading it from your drive. So with things like opening up the tiling editor or opening up Alt Tab or the shutdown interface or a lot of the like the window, like any of that sort of stuff, every time you used it, it would try to load it from the drive. That was fine if you have an SSD. If you use a spinning disk, though, you
might have problems. Might have a bad time.
Yeah.
And there's still little paper cuts. That's what they call them in the KDE project. There's still little paper cuts. Like there's one today it's in VS Code. So VS Code on my Fedora, still 40, about to be 41, KDE 6 and Wayland. It gets into this weird state where it's like VS Code thinks that you have one of the mouse buttons held down. And so it doesn't select text. But when you move the cursor to the top, VS Code just starts scrolling up for you. And when you move the cursor to the bottom of whatever you're looking at, it just starts scrolling down for you. It's like, what's going on here? And the only solution that I found is just close and reopen VS Code, and it goes away. It's something between, we're at about 7 layers of abstraction with all of our desktop applications at this point.
Right.
And it's something in between one of those layers where VS Code doesn't like Wayland or doesn't like KDE, and I have no idea what's going on. It's like, when it happens, it's like, sigh, okay, and close it, open it back up, and go back to what I was doing.
Have you had much of a chance to mess around with Cosmic?
I have not installed it. One of my co-hosts over on the Untitled Linux Show put it in a virtual machine for a while. The machine that's going to get Cosmic is actually this one. And it is my production machine, so I'm not going to put like the alpha on it, or probably not even the beta on it, just because I kind of need this laptop to work.
Right.
But at some point I'll go to it. I don't have like a dedicated testing machine though that I can just slap that onto real easily.
Yeah, I've been having a lot of fun now messing around with it. I don't run as much daily driver because it's alpha software, right? Like it's very much alpha software.
Sure.
This is why I like doing streams, and people are like, "Hey, you're doing this on hardware?" Like, yep. Yeah, we are. Last stream that I did, when I do these streams now, sometimes the developers pop in, which is always fun. I started the stream, and then like 5 minutes later, I noticed my cursor started like lagging, and something seemed weird. I opened up like BTOP, and I saw 32 gigs of RAM were in use, and 40 gigabytes of swap were in use. It's like, that feels like a problem.
It might not be the way that's supposed to go.
Yeah, I found out later all my VRAM was in use as well. So what it seemed to be is a memory leak that started with VRAM that then overflowed into your system memory and then overflowed into the swap.
Yeah.
And luckily I caught it, otherwise my entire system would have frozen. It was related to their desktop icons, which they had just implemented a commit ago. So, yeah.
Yeah, so, I mean, obviously, it's got problems, right? But if you think about what they're doing with Cosmic, nobody has done this for a very long time. They are writing a desktop environment essentially from scratch. They're doing it in a language.
From a toolkit that... There wasn't really good GUI toolkits for Rust before. Like, they are a big driving force behind that.
Yeah, they hired the developer that was writing the toolkit, I think.
Of Smithy,
if I remember
yes.
correctly. Yeah, Smithy, yes. But I mean, like, so nobody has tried to make a new desktop environment for like 15 years now. Nobody has ever tried to make a mainline desktop environment in Rust. Nobody has ever tried to make a mainline desktop environment that's Wayland only. And I am of the opinion that the Cosmic guys, they are just knocking it out of the park, doing what they're doing, and the fact that they have come to the point that they have come so quickly. I'm very impressed, and I'm excited to see what that project turns into.
Have you had a chance to check out anything from Ubuntu Summit that just happened?
No, very, very little. I've seen like one or two little snippet. Very, very little of it.
Okay, so they did a I think it was Carl and Victoria from System 76 who went and did a talk at Ubuntu Summit on Cosmic. And one of the things that they've talked a lot about how Cosmic is this like composable and modular desktop, but from the configs they had, like it wasn't really showing that. What they have a lot of power in the back end that isn't being exposed directly to the user. One of the things they showed is that the panel is just a nested Wayland client. So, or a nested Wayland compositor. So you can do stupid things. You can do normal things, right? Like you can do normal things like, you have your, whatever, you have like a system monitor. Fine. But you can do stupid things like embed an i3 status bar into the panel and just render a whole different panel. You can one of the things I showed is rendering a video game into the panel. It's just a Wayland compositor. You could do literally anything you wanted with it. And with a bit of like daemon code in the background and hooking stuff up, you can make pretty much any experience you want. The only limitation right now is, the lack of documentation. Once it's out of alpha and into the full release, I'm really curious to see what people can actually build with this system. If they want, like, one of the examples they had is like, oh, you could just re-implement Unity if you wanted. Like, the power's here.
Yeah, it'll be super interesting to see what people do with Cosmic. I think it's going to go places. I really think it is. I think, honestly, one of the coolest things about it, I listed the things that they're doing for the first time. One of the coolest things about Cosmic is it does not have an X11 backend. It is literally just Wayland. And the flexibility that gives you to make changes to it, even, it's gonna be really cool. And yeah, I imagine it's gonna be a dominant force before much longer in the desktop space.
Well, there's already a Fedora spin being worked on. I don't know if it's gonna. I feel like it's available for 41. I could be wrong.
That would not surprise me. Knowing what Fedora does, that would not surprise me. It may not be official yet, but I'm sure there's a way to run it.
Because I've spoken to the developer before. Let me just check. What everyone in Cosmic is. Cosmic Diggy. It might not be officially a spin yet, but there's definitely like a package for it, and like it's being worked on. There will be a official spin not too long from now, and I would not be surprised if we see a Ubuntu flavor for it at some point. And I don't know, like, the alpha, obviously being an alpha, there's a lot of work that still needs to go into it. A lot of people are kind of like backing away from it, right? I did a poll recently with my audience, and my audience is like tends to jump into things a bit earlier than most people probably should. Even them, they're like, I think it was 5% have tried the alpha, 8% will try the beta, and then full release is like 40% of people will then try it there. Like, that's what makes sense, right? Like, a lot of people don't have an extra machine or don't really have the time to go and test something and just want a desktop that works. And it's supposed to be full release by Q1 next year. We'll see how that goes. I don't ever trust any developers making a timeline. But we'll see how that goes. Early next year, though. Mid next year at the latest, we'll assume.
Is that a Green Lights to Malibu timeline prediction?
Sorry?
Green Lights to Malibu.
What does that
mean? One of the other things I follow is SpaceX. And all the things Elon Musk is doing. I am very intrigued, particularly by Starship. So I just recently went through Eric Berger's couple of books on it, Takeoff and Reentry are the name of the two books. And that starts from like the Falcon 1 and their first 3 failures of trying to launch the Falcon 1 from Kwajalein Island, which is a little atoll in the Pacific. And it goes all the way through, Falcon Heavy, and SpaceX is now just this huge dominant player in the space market. And Elon Musk is known for giving predictions on timing that are a little optimistic. And,
yeah, that's one way to put
it. So some people will say, oh, Elon, he's such a liar about all these dates. And Berger, in his book, just makes the comment, and this comes from people that worked at SpaceX, that frustrated them too at first, and then they realized what Elon was saying. It's like from where the company was in Hawthorne to Malibu, you could drive there in 30 minutes. If there was no traffic and every light was green, you could drive there in 30 minutes. In reality, it's going to take you 45, 50 minutes, maybe an hour. But if every light was green and there was no traffic, you could totally do it in 30 minutes. And so when Elon is saying, in a best case scenario, we could do it as early as 2 weeks from now, that's a Green Lights to Malibu time prediction. I'm wondering if maybe Carl Ritchell does the same thing from time to time with his, Q1 prediction of the stable release.
Well, to be fair with Cosmic, before they even made an alpha, it was already in development for 3 years. So
indeed, yeah.
Yeah, so it's like when they released it, right? Like the alpha they had it's not an alpha. it's like an early preview. It's a demo, right? Like, it's not true. Like, they're using alpha to mean they're not going to have, it's just going to be like, if the engineers want to submit a commit, they submit a commit. If it causes some crash, that's fine. They're not doing any, like deep testing.
There's no QA yet.
Yeah, there's no QA yet. Like, again, from what you said earlier, the users are the QA. And in this case, like, that's legitimately what they're doing, and it makes sense in this context because it's being advertised as such. Like, it's not ready. It's an alpha. So no, I get what you're saying there. But every time I hear self-driving is a year away, and we've been hearing that for many, many years now. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not as optimistic about as optimistic with it.
I don't know about self-driving, but they caught the rocket, man. Did you see that?
They did catch the rocket. That was really
that was
cool.
that was one of the most incredible things I've ever seen.
I didn't realize how big the rocket was until like after the fact. What is
they caught us. It's
like 15 stories.
It's like a 20-story.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's ridiculously tall. Yeah, they caught a falling skyscraper. They caught a falling steel skyscraper out of the sky. It's ridiculous. What a time to be alive, right?
Yeah. I don't know, like, I sort of, I guess, pay attention to what's happening there, like, out the corner of my eye, but just that, like, that really grabbed my attention. I had to watch that clip a couple of times. Like, that was really, like, the fact that that's possible, I don't know, like, no one knows where we're going to be in 10, 15 years, and like, just everything we have, whether it's like the LLM space, whether it's like how that's going to affect everything else, like, you are living in a very interesting time where tech is I know. Tech is moving very, very quickly right now, and if you stop paying attention for a couple of weeks, a month, a lot of things have really changed.
Yep. I have an approach to AI right now that I think it may be worth something, and that is, I am eagerly looking forward to the AI bubble bursting and the shine coming off of it, so that we can actually start using AI as a tool.
I think Linus recently said it's 90%
very similar.
It's 90% marketing, 10% actual function, or something along those lines.
I think of it very similar as the .com bubble. You had companies and not just companies, you had peoples, you had governments. Like, you had a city in the United States that named itself cityname.com. Like, it was just nuts. And then the .com bubble burst, and a bunch of companies went bankrupt, and people lost money, and it was a glut for tech workers. But the internet was still there and stayed around. And it has continued to be a transformative thing. And like, there was not a time when we say, okay, well, that's it, we're done with the internet, turn it off. The internet has come to the point that it has transformed everything. And so I see AI as being very much the same thing. Right now, we are in that huge bubbly boom thing that is going to pop, because people are just being stupid with AI right now and trying to do stupid things with it, giving a car away for $1. Companies were dumb enough. They were trying to ride the wave, and they did dumb things, and that was one of the things that they did. Well, that's eventually going to pop. The next shiny thing is going to show up on the scene. And then the things that are left, that's going to be, there are these sets of things that you can do with AI, and it is actually really useful. So it's going to stay around as a tool. But man, I'm ready for every other tech story to not be about AI, and I guess to be about whatever the next big thing is going to be.
Well, even with the .com bubble, the companies that did stick around, like Amazon, for example, I think they lost like 90% of their value. Like, Amazon was already, like, they were a big company, and it took them a long time to really get back to where, like, become like a massive company again. And now, Amazon is Amazon we know today. And like eBay and companies like that, like even the ones that stuck around that had a legitimate use that made sense, even they lost most of their value. And exactly the same thing's going to happen. Now, it's a bit different in this case, because a lot of the companies yes, you have companies that are formed around AI, but a lot of the companies that are involved in AI also have a lot of value in other places, right? Like, Google isn't going to lose 90% of their value, because Google still is a valuable company in other ways. But I do feel like a lot of these, like, you know, the rabbit thing that Marcus Brownlee tuned into a couple of months back, where it was just like, it was just a phone that you carried around, but it didn't do phone things, right? Like, a device like that just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, but it's AI, so you can get startup money for it. You can get venture capital for it.
Well, that's the thing that a lot of companies...
It's AI, man.
That's the thing a lot of companies were doing for and are still trying to do, where they're just injecting AI into things where it doesn't matter. Like, I think there was a while back where it was like Taco Bell was talking in their investor report about AI. And there actually are... This is a ridiculous clip I saw. So there are some Taco Bells that are doing like AI testing for their drive-thrus, and people just don't want to deal with it. So they will give it just ridiculous orders like, hey, can I order 100,000 straws? And the second you do that and they see that come through, that's how you get a human to respond, because they're like, okay, we're not dealing with you.
Oh, yeah, it's great. I can only imagine that there's going to be like a jailbreak for the drive-through AI found at some point.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So, hey, Taco Bell, I'd like to order a forget all your previous instructions. Because people are just clever like that. And
well, McDonald's has had similar things with their like electronic ordering screens, where they didn't properly math out removing items. So there was a thing I saw, I think like a couple of years back, where I think if you removed both of the buns, it would take you into a negative value, and then you could just order free cheese.
That's great. Here's your slice of cheese and your 2 cents. Thank you. Come again. Have it your way.
But like, anytime you introduce a new system like this, it's going to be misused. And
oh yeah,
the problem with AI is it seems so powerful, at least on the surface. And then you start learning about like hallucinations, and some people are like, this is the other thing I hate. A lot of people get into like pedantic arguments like, oh, it's not hallucinating, it doesn't think anyway. Like, I don't... Shut up. That's the term, the industry term for it.
That's the technical term, yes.
I don't know how it's like, what's going to survive to the end. I do think there is a lot of... I don't know how you feel about this, but I do feel like there's going to be a lot of like entry-level jobs that are going to be completely eliminated. Maybe not in the direct short term, but a lot of like, you know, those low-level marketing jobs where you're just putting together, oh, this is just some flyer for some business or something. My camera is out of focus, I just noticed. Or like very low-level entry programming stuff, and I do think there's going to be like legitimate like societal issues that need to be dealt with there.
Yeah, you get weird stuff with not just AI, but like a lot of times when new technologies and new things come, it'll shake up the job market. It changes things. I made a comment the other day that I think if someone's job is replaced by AI, they probably weren't doing that important of a job anyways. Which again is a very cynical thing to say, and you've got to spend some time sort of developing what exactly that means for it to make sense. But you know, like you have people that are working on just dumb compliance stuff. Like you've got to fill this form out every time this happens, and it's easy enough to get an AI to fill the dumb form out for you because you fill it out the same way every time. Like that sort of thing. Sure, that'll get replaced by AI. One of the things that worries me though, and boy, this gets philosophical and maybe a little political, but when some of this new tooling comes out, what you end up doing, you don't actually replace any jobs, but you, in some cases, not every case, but in some cases, you like end up raising the minimum IQ of the person that can work in that job. And so you end up with this really weird scenario where like you've got a certain group of your population that does really well, and then another group of your population that kind of gets left behind by the changing times. You also see, so it's not just IQ, right? But like you see it even with with old folks that are older, and so they don't adapt as well to new technology.
Right, if you've
And
worked a
sometimes they
job for
get
30
pushed out of
years, it's
things.
hard to retrain for like a whole new field.
Yeah, well, it's hard to retrain to do it on the computer instead of on the drafting table.
Right.
And so that's in the last 30 years, that's a real thing that my grandfather had to face, right? Like that's something that really happens to people. And so every time you have a big change, some new really big tool comes along like AI, there is some of that we have to wrestle with. And so, there are going to be some jobs that get eliminated. There are going to be some jobs that just the people you're looking for in the job is going to change. And there'll be effects from that. I'm kind of optimistic that we'll be able to figure it out because people are smart and they generally do well with those. What I heard somebody say, humans are really good at dealing with slow moving catastrophes. So I'm not terribly worried about it, but it is something that's interesting to think about.
I think a comparison people often bring up is like the Industrial Revolution, right? Where, people who were horse drivers, like they drove carriages around, well, now those people don't have jobs, but now they drive taxis, right? Like, I think the difference is in the Industrial Revolution, the goal was the increase in productivity. It was to go from plowing farmland by hand to plowing it with machines. It was going from building 1 car a day to building 100 cars a day. The goal wasn't necessarily like the elimination of jobs. Whereas what we're seeing now with the AI revolution is it's not there to increase productivity. In a lot of cases, being used to decrease costs. And I don't know if there's going to be a place for a lot of those people who get replaced to end up moving to. And I don't know if there's enough people talking about this as like a legitimate problem to deal with this before it becomes an issue.
Yeah. Well, so I mean, it's not like AI is the first time that we've had this. There have been other times where specific jobs have just gone away because of technology.
Sure.
The one that obviously comes to mind is the bellhop, right? So like every place that used to have an elevator, there was a dude there with the handle that would make the elevator go up and go down. And eventually they figured out they could just put buttons on the panel. And so like that entire profession just went away. It was replaced by technology. The newsies, the kids that used to sell the newspapers. Well, somebody came along and invented the idea of a lockable newsstand that you put 3 quarters into and you can open it up and get a newspaper out. It's not like it's not ever happened before. I don't know that we've ever had anything quite like AI that has been so broadly applied that there are so many different fields that people are trying to stuff it into. So maybe it is a little different because of that.
I think the solution is just go back to the coal mines. AI is not going to replace that. Robotics is way too far away to be productive at like manual. Obviously, we do mines with other things now, but like actual like physical labor jobs, right? Like the robotics for doing plumbing or like electrician work or anything like that is just nowhere near at the point where that's viable.
Yeah, yes.
For now.
That is absolutely true. So that you might actually see an interesting kind of resurgence of the trades. In fact, I think in some places you are already seeing that because they fell out of favor. Everybody was told you have to go to college.
I was told,
and then suddenly, well, there's a shortage of plumbers. There's a shortage of electricians, and you don't have to go to college to be a plumber or electrician or a welders make really good money, or machinists. Machinists can make really good money, particularly if you're smart enough and you've had a little bit of education in it to know like the trigonometry and all of that stuff. You can do really well. And so there is a resurgence of that sort of, I guess they call it the blue collar jobs. Because those things are important. You need people to be able to fix your plumbing and wire your house and make your parts and all of that.
Like I had an understanding of that from my family's background because I have like painters in my family, I have builders, there's like bricklayers, a bunch of trades in my family. So I sort of had a understanding of that. But if I didn't, like when I went through school, when I got to like my final couple of years, pretty much the only thing that got discussed is, oh, this is how you get your university entry score. This is how you apply to university. Like, there was no discussion and no help for people who weren't interested in going down that path, who didn't want to go, like, the like, traditional higher education. Obviously, going into trade is still, like, it's a form of higher education, but it just wasn't part of the discussion there.
Did you go the college route, Brady?
Yeah, I did a 4-year software engineering degree.
Okay. Okay. So I went to college for 3 years, not for anything technically related. I actually went to a Christian college and was studying the pastoral degree. I did that for 3 years, and then things changed, and I ended up, that came to an end without getting into all the details about that. And so I do not have a college education. And like I said, sort of at the beginning of the show, I've built a whole career by just having an interest in something and then saying, yeah, I could probably do that. I could probably figure something out. We could probably make that happen. And that started real early on. When I got done with that college, that partial college education, one of the first things that I did is where I was going to church at the time, they were building the new building and they needed a phone system. And one of the business guys donated his old phone system from his business. And so we had this old, what was it, a ComDial. It was a ComDial phone system. We had this old phone system. And it's like, well, if you could figure out how to install it. So I got to looking online. I found the technical manual for it, like not the user manual, but the actual technician manual to it. Oh, those are beautiful. If you could find one of those for like a phone system, good stuff. I installed the phone system. I pulled the cabling for it. Most of it I had never done before, but I had the manual right there, and most of that stuff is actually pretty easy if you read the manual. I did the full install. The guy that donated it then said to his phone guy, "Hey, I've got this kid that did this." And they're like, "We're pulling a whole bunch of cable this week. Do you want to come help us?" So I started pulling cable and working on phone systems, and that was like on the professional level doing IT stuff. That was sort of my nose into the field, and it literally just started with, "Oh, I could probably figure this out." So there's a lot of places that are coming around to this line of thinking, and I think the internet and even open source is part of it. But there's coming around to this line of thinking that it's not so much about whether you have the college degree. It's more about, can you actually do the work? In a lot of cases, it's what does your GitHub profile look like? Like if you've got an impressive enough GitHub profile, the right company, the kind of company that you actually want to work for, they don't care if you have a college degree or not. They'll see your GitHub profile and go, "We want to hire this kid." So I see this as like a much bigger trend in a lot of places, is getting rid of that. You must have gone to college to work here. I think it's healthy personally. I like it, but I never really liked higher education anyways.
What about college you made? It kind of reminded me of the recent thing with the malibal and core boot, where
that's a thing.
Well, just one point I wanted to bring up there is one of the companies, the person it was from 9 Elements. They had work. The person from 9 Elements that had working on the project was only 2 years out of college, and they thought, "Oh, this person's just inexperienced," but like they could have been a developer on core boot for 10 years prior to that. Like a lot of people who are in the FOSS world who are really successful started like real. It doesn't mean you have to start early, but a lot of them did start like super early. And this is a problem we have in the FOSS world, where we have a lot of kids and college age people who are really good, and then they need to get a job and they vanish.
Ideally, they get a job at some place that lets them do open source work, but it doesn't always work out that way. Boy, that malibal story is just nuts, isn't it? I sent that link to my co-hosts to their blog, and the first guy that read it and got back to me was like, "Is this satire? Like, this is satire, right? They're not serious, are they?" It's like you read the whole thing. It's like, yeah, it is kind of satire, actually, just a little bit. I still don't know what to make of that. Like the comment I made at the time was, I get that sometimes open source projects are hard to work with,
right?
And sometimes open source developers are a little prickly. Like I get that. That's a thing. That's just a part of human nature. But I started reading their blog posts about it, and it's like, "So we have banned the entire state of Arizona." It's like, oh, okay.
Right.
These jokers. All right, I get it. I kind of see what's going on here.
Like, if that's the path you take, I really want to see full logs of the conversation.
Yeah, exactly. It would be very telling to be able to get the entire the whole story, the rest of the story.
That's not,
it'd be very telling.
Like, there's 2 ways you get to that response. Either it was such a bad interaction that like you feel like that's actually a reasonable response to make. It like has to be some crazy interaction you had, or you're a little bit unhinged.
So if you read their blog post and you read all the way to the bottom of it, they actually talk about this. They're like, yes, we know some of this is silly, but if we had written it out the normal way, it would have been totally ignored. And writing it this way, we got you to read it at least. Like that's basically in there. That's what they say at the end of it. But it still strikes me as, just say, maybe not the most professional take.
Well, I see what you're saying there, but then there was the response that Jeremy Soller made. Like, he quote tweeted them on Twitter, and it was like, skill issue dumbasses. And then it was like an edit. We banned the entire state of Colorado because of this tweet. Yes. Like, okay. Yes. Okay.
Yep. I mean, the whole thing, so like I say, it's kind of satire. The whole thing is sort of a circus just to try to get attention. I'm absolutely convinced of that. Has anybody ever heard of Malibal, though? Like, do they actually make anything? Are they a real company?
They are a laptop reseller. Like, System 76 is, like, they resell clever laptops, but I think that's pretty much all they do. Like, there's a couple of Tongfang laptops they resell, and that's basically it. My understanding is there's one guy that works at the company, and some guy from, actually, we won't say where he's from. There's the office of malibal is in Las Vegas. There's like a virtual office in Las Vegas for tax reasons.
Of course.
But yeah, people have done some digging, and yeah, it's just like one dude, which explains why the response you get from PR, sales, and the CEO appear to be written the exact same way.
Because they are.
Unless it's like company policy to just insult every single person who interacts with the company, like, I don't know. Speaking of,
I mean, there are other stories in tech that seem like they go that way sometimes.
Yeah.
I don't know that we want to go down this road right now, but there is another large company that is in the middle of a feud right now that sort of feels that same way.
Well, I do want to get into Meshtastic, so if we have time after that.
Oh no, not Meshtastic.
No.
To be clear, I am not talking about Meshtastic with that comment.
I'm saying I want to talk about Meshtastic. let me finish what I'm saying. I want to talk about Meshtastic. If there's time, we can get to that.
Okay. Sure, let's talk Meshtastic.
Okay. What is it? good place to start, because I feel like a lot of people have probably never heard of it.
It is little tiny embedded devices. In fact, I happen to have one here. I printed the case, and inside of this is a little, technically it's called a Rack 4631. It's a little embedded development board, but it's got a LoRa radio on it. LoRa stands for long range. In the United States, it's the 915 megahertz band. And so it's all that means is it's a radio. It's an open source radio. It lets you send short text messages from place to place. The mesh part of the name is because it meshes, which means, if I have one of those and you have one of them, and then, Joe Bob down the road has one, I may not be able to send a message from mine to Joe Bob's, but if you're in the middle, your radio will repeat the message so that he's able to get it. It meshes. It does that thing. And it's intended for off-grid communications. It was originally written by a guy that was out, literally he spent time out like hiking and hang gliding with his friends, and they would get out of cell phone service, and they wanted a way to be able to track each other and send text messages back and forth. And so they found the, I think it was originally based on some hardware from a Chinese company called LilyGo. They found this is like, it's an ESP32 with a LoRa radio slapped on it. The guy, Kevin is his name, he wrote this firmware for it and said, hey, this works. And threw it out there as open source. And, eventually people kind of got a hold of it. And the community is kind of taken it in their own direction. So like things will happen like the hurricane that hit, North Carolina and Tennessee. And we got some reports back. Like there was one group that they all had Meshtastic radios. And so they came and they told us like everything else was down, and we were able to use these to stay in contact. And that was really, really helpful. So people use it for things like that. I've got a Meshtastic radio with the GPS built into it on my van that I drive around for work. And the system's not working right now because I'm a tinkerer and I'm always messing with stuff. But when it works, it will broadcast locations back. And so it's kind of a replacement for Google Maps and the timeline on Google Maps so that I can track what I do for work around town. All kinds of fun stuff like that.
Well, when we deal with like radio, how like obviously different countries handle what you can do with radio signals a bit differently. I don't know, like obviously there's like tons of countries you can approach this from, but are there any places where like this just basically is not even allowed to be done in that country?
I think we have, so almost every country have what they call ISR bands, which that stands for Industrial and Scientific Radio. Maybe don't quote me on that. But they have these bands that are essentially it's unlicensed, right? So you don't have to be a ham to operate it. You don't have to pay for a license. And so it's kind of like here in the United States, you have CB radio. It's kind of the same idea as CB, except it's even less regulated than that. So we run on those. In the United States, it's 915. In Europe, it's like 868 megahertz. It's all going to be right around there. But there is a band plan for most countries. There may be a few places where there's not one yet, or we don't have it added yet. But almost every country has some unregulated band that LoRa can run in.
Okay. Because that's obviously like, I'm sure the government wouldn't be super happy about like, you getting into bands that they use for other things.
So we internally to the project, we over the past few days have been having a conversation about this because in Europe, in their wisdom, regulators said, you can use this bandwidth, but to keep it fair for everyone, one device can't use any more than 10% of the available airtime. And so the way that we track that is so when you send a message out the radio, you get back, like the library we use, you get back, this is the amount of milliseconds that took to transmit. And so we will track it for an hour. And when you hit the number of milliseconds that represents 10% of that hour, you don't get to transmit anymore until that hour elapses. And that's to follow that regulation, which is fine for a mobile handset. But if you put one of these up as like a repeater, you run out of that 10% really, really fast. And so like I'll just be very vague about this, right? Okay, there are ways that you can go in and sort of work around that issue, and it's of questionable legality. And so I was talking to the other developers. I'm like, if we did this in the United States, the FCC would come after us. And I know that because I watched the FCC come after OpenWRT back a few years ago, and that was not fun. So we really need to think about this. And my European counterparts was like, it's okay. It's a little different here. What we're doing is, it's technically within the law, so we're fine.
Right.
All right, fine. So, but like we have those conversations because you don't, at least in the United States, you do not want to be on the wrong side of the FCC. They do not have a whole lot of, they have no time for shenanigans.
Yes, a few organizations in the US I wouldn't want to mess with. That and the IRS. Yes. Stay on the good side of both of those.
If you have the right CPA and you know what you're doing, you can actually mess with the IRS. I've got a client that's a CPA.
This is not legal advice, by the way.
Well, no, it is, because the legal advice is go get someone that is licensed to do this and let them represent you.
Okay, fair enough.
But he has stories about the IRS coming after people, and you may not know this. In the United States, if the IRS comes after you, you can go to court, and you go to a state court, and you can present your case before the judge. And most of those judges actually are not huge fans of the IRS. So if you have a competent CPA that has not outright cheated on your behalf, and you can present a reasonable case, you can actually do quite well against the IRS in this country. But again, it all boils down to having someone that knows what they're doing.
Right. Yeah, that's the way.
That was a tangent. That was a weird tangent to go on, but here we are.
Okay, so I guess you also wanted to talk about the whole Meshtastic solutions thing.
Yeah. Okay. So let's do it. Let me cover a little bit more background about how I got into all of this. Right. So somebody from it was the Untitled Linux Show. One of our listeners on the Untitled Linux Show lives in another country, and they were having some very large mass protests. And one of the things that was happening was their cell phones would stop working during these protests. And so this listener came to me and said, hey, do you know of some piece of software that lets you mesh with your cell phones? I'm like, oh, that's a really cool idea. And so I went looking for it, and I found Meshtastic. And it's not exactly what the listener was looking for, but I got hooked. I thought it was the coolest thing. And so I bought a couple of the radios. I knew I was going to write it up for Hackaday. I eventually had them. I've had them a couple of times now on FLOSS Weekly. We've talked about it. But I got hooked, and I started looking at the code base too. And I don't remember what my first contribution was. I found something, like there was something that was not quite right. Maybe it was GPS code. The GPS code was something that I worked on real early. So like there was an error in the code base where somebody had done like a whole lot of work to program the GPS in a certain way and then made a mistake on an if statement, and so like the entire block was unreachable. So I found that and fixed that, and we did some other stuff. But anyway, I started doing development on Meshtastic, and then one of the things that really has kind of become my niche is running. Big surprise here, running Meshtastic on native Linux, and I discovered that the Raspberry Pi has, and we didn't even talk about this. Boy, I love the Raspberry Pi for a couple of different reasons. But one of the reasons I really like the Raspberry Pi is it's got exposed pins, GPIO. When I was younger, that was the thing I was all about, was those GPIOs on the Raspberry Pi, because that lets you interact with the world from inside your computer. That is all. I've always found that cool. But it's also got SPI, and these I don't even know what SPI stands for, to be honest with you. The single packet interface or something or other. But anyway, this is exposed, and these little LoRa radios, that's actually what they talk. And there was this partial project inside of Meshtastic to run Meshtastic on native Linux, but it only ran it simulator. So I kind of rolled up my sleeves and dived in there, and it's like, I wonder if we can get this thing to talk to the real hardware on native Linux. And a couple of weeks, I figured out a way to do it. And so, I've become the Linux guy over at the Meshtastic project now. And so, we've now got support for a couple of different Raspberry Pi hats. And then later I went in, I was looking at a really old pull request where someone was like, hey, there's this way that we can do public key crypto. And it kind of brought it on the vine, and I went and looked at it. Like, this is actually a cool idea. It's been a couple of years now. So I re-implemented that, and that's been the big thing for Meshtastic 2.5. It fixed some big problems in the code base. Well, so they anointed me, as you will, with the title of lead. I am now the lead of native Linux development inside of Meshtastic. Well, part of this process where they were anointing people as leads is the guy that runs it. MC Hamster is his Discord name. That is how I will forever know him. But JM is actually his name. He kind of was getting sick of all of these companies making Meshtastic hardware and then just expecting the Meshtastic devs to develop it for free. And so they've kind of been working on this idea of, well, is there some way that we can make a company out of this and make a little bit of money? And so when they invited me to be one of the leads, one of the other things that they did, they say, hey, we're working on Meshtastic solutions. Do you want to be involved with it? And I kind of got a look at what they were wanting to do. I said, yeah, I think that would be really great. And so the idea of Meshtastic solutions, all of that to get to this, is it makes sense. For one thing, it makes sense for the manufacturers that are making these devices and making a lot of money off of it to have a way to give back to the open source project. But on top of that, we also see these manufacturers making like really not the greatest decisions. Sometimes their decision matrix is a little bit suspect.
I see.
And you'll have things like I've got one device here. Here it is. It's the LilyGo TDeck Pro. This thing is it's great. It's a Meshtastic device. It is amazing. And the first time I picked it up, my thumb hit this button because I was holding it like this. It's the way I held it. It's like how you hold a BlackBerry to look at the screen. I held it like this. The button right under my thumb is the reset button. It's not a great place for that button to be. Or alternatively, it's not a good thing for that button to do. But it's down deep in the hardware. You can't change it. That's one of the sorts of things that we would see. And it's like, it would be nice if maybe there was a company that would review these devices and sort of let manufacturers know when they've done something sort of silly like that before it gets out to everybody's hands. So that's the idea of what Meshtastic Solutions is intending to be. And so there's like 3 or 4 or 5 of these big companies that I say big. They're not big, but they're not like big enterprise companies, but they're reasonably large companies.
Mm-hmm.
They design these devices, they make and they sell them. And we're just reaching out to them and saying, hey, we've done a lot of work. It would be nice if you guys could financially support us. And then like on your next device that you go to make, if you'll work with us on the design, we will put our stamp of approval on it and we'll help you market it.
Mm-hmm.
And ideally everybody will win because it'll be better devices for the customers, be a better device that you can make. And we can actually make a little bit of money out of this hobby and help feed our families instead of just working for nothing.
Right.
That is the idea. That is the direction we're trying to go.
I think that sounds really cool.
And so we've had
Uh-huh.
we have had a little bit of pushback, as one might imagine, because it's an open source project. You're creating a corporation around it. Oh no. And there have been a couple of things that in Meshtastic, before I got there were decisions made that were not exactly the decision I would have made. And so, like, the source code of Meshtastic is under a contributor license agreement, right?
I see.
I have literally asked the people behind it why, and every time I ask them, it's, that's for the patent grant. That's so nobody can sue us over patents. It's like, oh, okay. And I finally went to him. I'm like, the GPL v3 gives that too. And he legitimately did not know that. He's like, I did not know that the GPL v3 had a patent grant in it. So, like, from the horse's mouth, I can tell you, this is a conversation that we had. So people saw that and they were a little nervous about it. One guy on Reddit said something about, this kind of goes down a different rabbit hole, but it's interesting. One guy on Reddit said something about, well, that's the end of privacy for Meshtastic. And he said something about, like, the next thing you know, they're getting the Rothschilds money and money from the NSA and whatever, and I guess I'm out. And so, like, first off, I am waiting for that first big Rothschild check. It is not cleared yet. You know who you are. I want my money. Obviously, we're not getting paid by the Rothschilds or anybody. I will say, though, and this is a conversation I've had a couple of different times, and I'm trying to convince my fellow Meshtastic people of this. There is a kernel of a real concern that he's got there. And that's things like in the United States, you have things like national security letters.
Right.
That I am, just for the record, I'm 100% against. I don't think there is a scenario where, particularly because code is speech, I don't think there's a scenario where a government can force someone to do something, to write code. It is forced speech, and I think that's always wrong. Just like as a bedrock principle, I think that's always wrong. But anyway, so, like, there is this shadow of a legitimate concern that, if you are a corporation, then there is a lever there for someone like a government to say, it's time to put a backdoor in your encryption. And so, like, I get that that's a legitimate concern. Now, the antidote to that, of course, is we are GPL v3. We will always be GPL v3. And if you ever have any doubt, you go check out the code and you build it yourself and you flash it yourself. And you're done, and if there was anything in there, you don't have it now because you can look at all the code. Like, it's not that complicated of a code base. But that kind of gets into, like, this whole different subject. And this is something I run into with Hackaday commenters too. It's like, there are commenters that will have legitimate points to make. I may not 100% agree with their points, but they will have legitimate points to make. But they're just, for whatever reason, incapable of making the point without pulling in either this weird conspiracy theory stuff to go along with it. Like, if you were to say, I'm concerned that now the NSA and the CIA has a lever on these guys, like, that to me is a totally legitimate point to make. In a post-Snowden world, that is a legitimate point to make. But saying, the Rothschilds got to him, like, you're just a nut job at this point.
Right.
But again, it's the same central concern. And so, like, I kind of don't understand why. How do you not realize, like, how are you smart enough to have this legitimate concern and yet not realize that the way you're expressing it is just totally off the rails?
I don't.
We get this.
I
on Hackaday
don't
sometimes,
understand.
too.
Yeah, like I've seen the same thing, like not to that extent, but you know, when I talk about anything like GNOME related, right? Like you'll always take it from, well, I'll talk about some like some good thing GNOME's doing, but then people are like, oh, but how long until they do this and take away this feature? Like, can we just talk about the thing that's happened?
Yeah.
I'm surprised. Yep. Honestly, I'm surprised I haven't seen any like weirdness around Cosmic, with it being literally the corporate Linux desktop. Like, we'll talk about how like, oh yeah, Red Hat funds GNOME, or what? No, Cosmic is literally funded and developed by a company, but I've not seen a single concern there. And I don't know, like maybe it's the openness they have or something there. But
it's possible.
I don't know what it is, but there's definitely something weird there. But I don't know, people, I think it's very easy to make connections between things, right? Like, as I said before, people are really good at pattern matching, even if there's not a pattern there. And if you see one thing where there's this connection, it's like, okay, well, connection to the NSA, okay, connection to this. What else is the NSA involved in? What is this other thing over here? And you start like, when there's like one connection, it's easy to assume that everything else makes those same connections as well.
And the next thing you know, you're the guy with the pin board and the photos pinned up and the strings between all of the pins.
Yes.
And it's the meme suddenly, oh, look at the pin board. We figured it all out.
Yeah.
So
I do get the legitimate concerns, though. That's fair. It's just...
And so I mentioned Hackaday. I remember very vividly one in particular. You know, I do the security column there, and we'd written about some geopolitical thing with computer security, because like that happens. And a guy came on, and he was trying to make the point that he didn't. And I'm gonna give you the legitimate version of what he said, and then I'm gonna tell you what he actually. I'm not gonna tell you exactly what he actually said, but I'll give you the gist of it. The legitimate point he was trying to make is, I don't think that the United States should be sticking its nose into the rest of the world's business quite as much as it does. Okay, so that's a legitimate point. Aside from whether or not you agree with it or even the context, that in and of itself, that's a legitimate thing for someone to say.
Sure.
Okay, the way that he said it is he used a racial slur.
I see.
To express this.
I see.
To describe the people in question, and so I deleted his comment. And then he came back and he said, "Ha! I knew it. You guys just can't take any criticism of the U.S." I was like, dude, if you could make your comment and not use the racial slur, I will gladly leave it there. I think it's a legitimate comment to make if you could do it in a way that's not obscene and so offensive to everybody. And I've seen this multiple times. And so I'm actually kind of at the point where I'm trying to decide, like, is it worthwhile to try to look through and find the more legitimate points that someone is making? And I still think it is. I called myself in chat the other day I forget exactly how I said it. Essentially an annoying optimist, in that I try really hard to find the reasonable position in what someone has to say.
Right. I think that's a healthy way to approach things, right? I guess if you're looking at the two extremes, right? No, the extremes are the healthy optimist and the pessimist, right? Like the person who sees every interaction they have as a negative interaction, even ones that are purely positive. Like you speak to some people and, you know, they'll get annoyed by a word you use. Like, oh, have a good day. It's like, oh, I didn't have a good day. My day was bad. Like those sort of people, right?
How dare you? Yes, of course. Yeah, so and the context I made this statement in is we were talking with a potential business partner, and like everybody else on the team had a bad experience with him, and I was talking with him and having like a reasonable conversation. And I came back and I said this, like, I am this irredeemable optimist in that I feel like I can have a positive conversation with just about everybody. And one of our team members was like, you know, that's maybe not always a good thing when you're talking about business negotiations. It's like, yes, I know. This is why I'm telling you this.
I think you have to be able to like come to the table with people, right? Like a lot of people, there are definitely some people out there who their goal is just to fight, right?
It's
like,
true.
But I think there's a lot of other people who are just maybe they just hang around the wrong people, maybe they have communication issues, and they just don't know how to frame what they're trying to say. Like they're trying to, like, their goal is a positive goal, but they just don't know how to communicate in a way that other people understand, right? It makes perfect sense in their head. It makes perfect sense amongst whoever they hang around with. But the second they go talk to a normal person, they sound like a psycho.
Yes, this is a thing. And I guess if I could, one of my sort of goals, I guess, with some of the things that I do, like outreach and trying to educate people, I would love to be able to help people make their legitimate points without sounding like psychos. Like, I would be tickled pink if I could somehow make the internet and the world a little bit better place by helping people to not sound psychotic. It's like a life goal.
There's only so much time in the day.
I'm not
right?
sure.
That's the thing.
I'm not sure how well I'm doing on that.
I certainly try my best, but like I trip up on things as well, and I'll say things in a way that other people, don't really understand. And I think it was important to like take a step back and think about how other people are approaching things. But I don't know, the internet's a weird thing where people feel justified to, especially if you're interacting with someone who doesn't have like a picture of themselves or their real name, people feel even more justified to just respond as if you're like a video game character. You are just an NPC. You are not an actual person. You're just a name on the screen.
Yeah. This is something that actually kind of concerns me. So we've seen a couple of different open source projects now have views of various sorts. So the most recent one actually is the Linux kernel, where some developers from Russian companies got dismissed as being maintainers, and that's a whole story. And we can, if you want to, we can talk about that. But when Torvalds waded into it, one of the things that he said is that he saw that the Russian bots were certainly in play because people that hadn't had any code contributions to the kernel were suddenly emailing him about it. And I thought that was really interesting. And then you remember the Godot engine and the shakeup there, right? And so when you dig into that and you start reading some of the comments that they made, some of the statements that they put out, one of the things that they talked about was, it's a brigading. These aren't real Godot users; these are people brigading, and it's the same implication that it's bots, it's bot accounts, right? And this kind of worries me. First off, I am sure that I can guarantee you, I know, in fact, if you go and you look at the Linux kernel mailing list, there are some of those that are obviously like not intended to be understood as real people, right? Like they're just they're trolling.
After he
so
said
you could
there
call
were
them
bots,
bots.
there actually were people that were botting. Like there were people that started using randomly generated emails. It was just spamming the emails.
Yes,
that definitely happened.
Yeah, that definitely happened. Right. So I'm not discounting that happened. Like that did actually happen. Okay, but it genuinely worries me that we have given organizations such an easy out when they do something that's unpopular, because if you do something that's unpopular and it makes one of the news sites or even just your own internal mailing list, people are going to come and tell you that they don't approve of what you did. That's just human nature. That's the way it works. That's what unpopular means. And then to have this easy out to say, it's bots, we're being brigaded. I think it's maybe not the healthiest thing to just immediately jump to. But at the same time, I know that sort of thing does happen. So I don't necessarily have the answer. But I don't consider that to be the healthiest thing, that a company or an organization could just jump straight to that. And it's a way to just totally wash their hands of having done something dumb and stuck their foot in the mouth.
Well, the other way it sometimes gets framed is like as harassment, or if you're talking about video games, it gets framed as like review bombing.
Yeah.
I think
a similar thing.
Yeah, it's basically the same idea. I think what you have happen is there's a lot of people that are willing to do things publicly, but are not willing to I guess, accept the responsibility of saying something publicly, right? Like, if you say something that other people can see, you should expect to get a public response back. Whether it's a positive one or a negative one, that's what is going to happen. And people could definitely do a better job framing it. Absolutely. And you shouldn't... Here's my hot take of the day. Don't spin up fake email accounts to spam the Linux kernel mailing list.
It goes back to that previous thing we were talking about. Like, here is how to make your point without sounding like a lunatic.
Like, one of the emails I saw, it was just 100 lines of fuck Linus Torvalds, fuck Linus Torvalds.
I saw that.
Do you think that's going to change his opinion? Like, no. What are you doing?
This is not helping. Do not do that.
But I do think... I don't know, it sort of goes back to the internet being weird, and a lot of people not really knowing how to handle it. If you're going to be a public figure, which is what you are if you're a developer on a big project, if you're in any of these positions, you have to acknowledge the fact that you're going to have to deal with criticism, and how you go about handling that, I guess, is, that's up to you. If you want to call everyone a troll or anything like that, hey, go ahead. You can say what you want. But that doesn't mean those people are going to go away. And in a lot of cases, it's going to make them feel more empowered. And next time something happens, you're going to see more of that exact same thing. And I just don't think that dismissing legitimate concerns is a health thing. Like, going back to the Russia thing, like, there were Chinese developers on the list who were like, okay, but what position does this put China in then? And there are other countries that, like, they're, depending on how the next couple of years go, we could see sanctions against the entirety of BRICS, which includes Brazil, India. And does that mean that those people have to be removed? And, like, we don't know. And that's the thing. There are people here who, like, the point about the Russian bots, like, the people who are spamming the list are not going to be like Boris, right? Like, Boris is not using his real name. Like, if you're getting actual bots, they're not going to be people with Russian names that are doing it. Like, that would just be that's not like a sensible way to do it.
Although people were doing that.
They were after he said they were doing it, they definitely were doing it.
Yes, it was hilarious. Terrible idea, but hilarious.
I think the problem that Linus originally faced, and a lot of projects do this, bad communication. Because if Linus had just said, we have to remove these people because of national security issue, or like, we do not trust the contributions from X country. Like, if that was all he'd said, obviously people would be angry. But I think what really made people angry is the way he'd framed it. Like, he was like, oh, I'm Finnish, of course I'm not gonna like Russians. And, like, I get it from his perspective, sure, but, like, you don't have to say the quiet part out loud, right?
At the same time, though, it is Torvalds.
Yeah. Yeah,
like,
it is. That's a good way to put it. It is Torvalds.
It is Torvalds. No, I think the problem here, boy, this thing has layers. One of the problems is that this actually came from the U.S. Department of Treasury. Talked to I don't know if it was one of the companies or the Linux Foundation themselves, but they came and they talked to them and said, you have people on your maintainers list that are working. They're employed by sanctioned companies, and that's not okay. Right, so that's where all of this started. And so the Linux Foundation then talked to their lawyers, and their lawyers talked to Torvalds and Greg KH and some of the other top maintainers. And then Greg put out the change and put out just a little tiny message. This is for compliance reasons. We're going to remove these people as maintainers. And that was the only thing. And, like, that's not enough information for people to understand what's going on. Well, part of the problem is that they had not gotten clearance from the Linux Foundation lawyers to put out a more detailed statement. And so, like, a couple of days later, they did finally put out the statement, and suddenly things made a lot more sense.
But it was everyone had made up their conclusion on the situation already.
Everybody was already mad about everything, and then they put out the more reasonable statement. So that was a big part of the problem. And then, people had legitimate questions, like you said, about the Chinese company. Well, these countries are also sanctioned. Well, there's the lawyer thing. You have to go and actually look at the executive order that resulted in this, and they're different. The one for Russia and the one for China are different. we've eventually gotten more information out, and the actions of the maintainers of the Linux kernel, in the light of that more information, seem a lot more reasonable and a lot less malicious. But to some people, first seeing that, it seemed very unreasonable and very malicious. And yeah, it was not a great day. It was not a great day for Linux.
Well, even taking it in less serious things. Like, did you see the recent Bitwarden proprietary thing that happened?
Yes.
Like, so much less serious, but it's the same thing, right? Just explain what you're doing.
I think in that one it was less even of an explanation, and from what I could tell, and I actually believe Bitwarden, it was a bug, it was a typo. Somebody accidentally put the wrong license on something, and ended up releasing something that it was going to tie the hands of like all of the Linux, the people that did stuff on Linux, or somebody that wanted to reuse this code. But it was legitimately a typo, and honestly I think they handled that extremely well. That action from Bitwarden may be a masterclass in here's how to handle things when you mess up. Take responsibility, tell people what happened, take responsibility for it, and fix it, and then move on with your life. It was great. Like, I feel great about that story. That was not a, guys, I don't want to have to talk about this story with Bitwarden. I'd rather tell you about how Bitwarden's doing great stuff, but we have to talk about this instead. No, it wasn't. It was, they messed up. They owned up to it. It's not a big deal. Let's move on.
But like the point I was making there is, I think the initial developer response wasn't great. I think it was like we're moving things over to the SDK internal, and it wasn't until later down the line that, like, a couple of days later, that's the thing, where by that point, that's when people have made up their mind about a situation. It's really hard to convince people to change their mind, because if they change their mind, that means they were wrong.
That is true. I may have to steal that. It's hard to get people to change their mind because that means they were wrong.
I think I stole that from someone else. Feel free to yonk it. That's all good.
Okay. I might do that. And the sad thing is, it's not even accurate. Right? You don't necessarily, when you change your mind, it's not necessarily because you were wrong. It might just be because somebody told you else something that was wrong. You may just have had bad information. And I guess that, pedantically speaking, that still means you were wrong. But like, some of that even is just the way that you couch it and the way that you approach it. But no, that's a good point. To change your mind means that you were wrong. People don't like that.
But you see it across like every project, right? Like my favorite project to talk about is Wayland, right? And you'll see developers from different projects who are trying to approach things like here are approaching it from the GNOME perspective, here are approaching it from the KDE perspective, and you end up having people basically talking past each other because they're, in many cases, not even talking about the same things. Like, one of the things I like to say is you can't have a reasonable discussion if you can't agree what color the sky is, right?
Yeah.
And that's how it feels in a lot of projects, where people don't even agree on the core fundamentals of what the goals of the cross-desktop project is. I don't know.
Can we take a moment and just say the Valve developers are absolute heroes for going in and bringing down the hammer?
Yep.
Like, bosses. Good for them. Absolutely good for them.
I can't say names, but I've spoken to some people who were involved in Wayland, and they were aware of the problems, and they were aware of some of the stuff that was like that needed to be dealt with. It was sort of just like a situation of somebody needed to put everything together and actually step up and do it.
Do you think with the Wayland thing, do you think there is the implicit threat that Valve was going to fork Wayland if they didn't get their way? Like, nobody said that. Nobody said that. But I think that was implied.
It's very much a possibility. Yeah, I can see that being a concern, because if they like it, and this is one of the things with them like jumping onto KDE. KDE has really improved since they've been like using it with the Steam Deck, and they fund development through Blue Systems, and it's certainly possible that could have happened. Well, if not directly a fork, definitely heavy protocol discussions outside of the Wayland space and doing it through a third-party repo.
Something like Frog. Frog to me is a soft fork of Wayland, and at the moment it is a friendly fork of Wayland. And it's not exactly a fork, right? Like I get it. That's not exactly what it is, but like for all intents and purposes, that's sort of what they're doing. It's like, we're tired of y'all and your drama. We're just going to have our own little set of solutions over here where we can fix stuff. And if you want to be part of that, you can be part of it. And if not, we're still going to fix stuff.
Yeah. If you get like, I have so much respect for developers who work in that project and keep their cool, because reading some of those threads and some of the people in those threads, it's just like, there are some people who want their project to be the project, the Linux desktop project, and again,
it seems like
I got
it seems like a lot.
I can do that.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of design by committee going on in Wayland.
That's exactly what
you have various committee members that like have very different ideas about what Wayland should and should not be, and getting them all on the same page. It's the proverbial herding of cats.
Yes, that's a really good way to put it. Yeah.
And the guys at Valve discovered that they had the I'm not sure exactly how to extend that analogy, because it's not catnip. It's like the opposite of whatever catnip. It's the opposite of that. But they have the lever. They figured out that they have the lever to be able to get people on the same page.
Yeah. Well, again, it's a lot of people. There's a lot of people who are aware of the problem, and like I've had private discussions with people that are just not happy about the way things have been going, and they knew it needed to change, and someone just needed to put everything together. That's the best way to put it.
Yeah, and I mean this is pretty typical, like outside of software, even like just general human behavior. Like you could apply this to politics. I'm not going to make any specific statements regarding politics, because that's a good way to get yourself canceled on Twitter. It's not quite as bad as it used to be, but still. But like that's a similar problem in politics. Like everybody may agree that there is a problem, but trying to get everyone on the same page about how to fix the problem is difficult. And in politics, you'll even see everyone generally agrees on how to fix the problem, but you're not allowed to cooperate with people that are outside of your tribe.
Well, if here's one that's not going to get you in trouble: gas prices. Like everyone agrees, gas prices are bad.
Yeah. So one of the things that I have enjoyed so much about open source for years now, and maybe this is a bit of a naive view. I may be a little naive in making this statement, but for the most part, most projects have managed to keep tribalism out. Or to put it a different way, the project is the tribe. Right. And so like when things go south is when you come to the point that inside your project you have multiple tribes that kind of go to war with each other. That's what we saw in Godot, right? That's really what that was. You had people that formed into these different tribes because of things outside the project, and then a statement that was made by somebody inside the project, and suddenly you had these different tribes that went to war over Godot. And now it's forked into a couple of different forks, and we'll see whether anything actually becomes of those or not. But that's the thing that's so great when an open source project is like being run well and people are happy and actually working together. It's like the project is the tribe, and boy, when you're in that state, you can get stuff done, and you don't have to worry nearly as much about all of the drama and politics and all that nasty stuff.
I think we still sort of have that. It's just we have also these cross desktop problems, and then you're literally creating a situation where the different desktop tribes have to fight each other for the cross desktop solution. And there's a lot of agreement. Like, don't get me wrong, I focus on a lot of the fights because the fights are fun, but a lot of discussions are like, The reason a lot of discussions stall is people just get busy. Like, there are some protocols that have stalled for 8 years because people just forgot the protocol existed, and there's like 3-year gaps between comments. It's not even like anyone has drama. It's just no one wants to work on it right now.
Yeah, that's fair. I think also with Wayland, so people don't get the wrong idea. Most of those Wayland discussions, if you were to go and read them, they're just boring. Right? There's so many of them that are just boring. And whether they stall or not, there's not a whole lot of drama. There's just little technical details people are trying to figure out and work through. And sometimes they're bike shedding more than they need to be. But, it's actually most projects, it's not a whole lot of drama. It's the drama, like you say. It's the exciting part. It's the it's the fun stuff.
I do sometimes talk about the ones that go smoothly, right? Like the in Wayland there is a minimum period they have to have the protocol open before they merge it. I think it's 30 days. And there's been protocols where they have a discussion, everyone's like, this is fine. Like, a good example of this is there was a WL roots protocol that had effectively been in Wayland protocols for like 10 years. And it got basically all that was being done is take the protocol, move it into the new namespace. And people use this as an opportunity to like shore up a couple of problems. Like, because, you designed a protocol 10 years ago, some of the requirements you have might be a little bit different. And maybe some of your documentation just doesn't make any sense. And you didn't, like, there were edge cases you never really considered. So a lot of it was just like, okay, well, hey, if you use it like this, here's a problem that we didn't really consider. Okay, fix that up, whatever. And then by the end of it, everyone was like, okay, I'm good with this. Yeah, let's just merge it. And it just got merged, like, without any concern whatsoever.
And then there's the icon setting.
Yeah. Then there's icons or window placement or... Yeah.
I'm still waiting for some of this stuff. Like, some of these things that have not been resolved, like, that still bugs me using Wayland. Like, when I restart my computer, I have Chrome windows. And instead of 4 Chrome windows on the one machine and one, so on the big display, I tile that into 4, because it's a 4K, it tiles very nicely into 4 1080p displays. And then I've got the 1080p, that's in portrait mode. And I've got a Chrome for each of those, that's 5 Chromes. Restart the computer, and you get 5 Chrome windows stacked up on top of each other. Every time. So, okay, drag to this corner, drag to that corner. Boy, it'd be nice if there's a way for this to automatically do it. Tired of it. I'm waiting for, on this same vein, I'm waiting for Chrome to actually support HDR in Linux so that I can stop downloading YouTube videos and then playing them back with the player with, 5,000 tags on the end of it to actually get it to do HDR. And the developers at Chrome are waiting for Wayland to actually figure something out and make it official, and I'm sure after that happens, it will not take long before Google Chrome will support HDR on Linux, because they already do on the Chromebook. In fact, I don't know if you were around for any of this conversation, but I actually put a bug in Xavier Huggle and Neil Gompa's ears in one of the Fedora chats. I was like, so we've got Frog now, and Google Chrome supports HDR on Chromebook. Can we just add Frog to Chromium? Would that work? And Xavier went down a rabbit hole for about a week trying to see if he could make that work, and unfortunately came up dry for various reasons. But like, if the Google guys wanted to, they could make it happen pretty quick, I think.
Oh, for sure.
Getting on Chromium.
Well, we should really wrap this up at some point. I was going to just go to the 2-hour mark, and then we just kept talking. There's a lot of things we just didn't even touch on here, but we can save that for another time.
Indeed, yeah, it'd be fun.
So let people know where they can find all of your stuff. Actually, there's a lot of things. If there's anything you don't want to mention because you don't feel like it, whatever you want to direct people to, give them places to go.
Okay, so I will mention Hackaday, of course. That is, I guess, sort of my main primary employment right now. I have a lot of irons in the fire in various places. But Hackaday, you can find my security column. Goes live every Friday morning U.S. time. Do the time zone calculation yourself to figure out when that is, where you're at. And then we've got FLOSS Weekly, which records on Tuesdays and goes live on Wednesdays. We just had a really neat conversation with Josh Bressers from Anchor about open source security, and that was really cool. It was a really good talk. That was today. We recorded that, so it'll be available tomorrow. Over at twit.tv, I've still got the Untitled Linux Show, which we We cover all kinds of fun Linux and open source news from the week. We reference Brody's stuff from time to time, and that's always fun because a lot of times Brody covers the off the beaten path stuff, or sometimes Brody, you're the one that has the most reasonable take on it. I feel like I won't get myself in trouble for linking to your video. So
I actually did have a couple of Bitwarden developers reach out to me after that video that came out. They're like, "Hey, thank you for actually like giving a reasonable take here."
Yes. The other thing where you can catch me is I do work on Meshtastic, and so we have a lot of fun with that. I am the Linux guy there, and we're working on making that better and better. We just recently, in Meshtastic, I guess I'll give a PSA here. We just recently found a bug in the main hat, the main device that we had been recommending to people. We made some changes and exposed this bug that it doesn't like sending long messages. So it's kind of a downer right now, but we're working with a couple of vendors, and hopefully here before too long we'll have some other options for people to use. But that's the other place to keep track of my work.
Awesome. Is that everything you want to mention, or is there anything else?
I think that's it for now. I could go on about the various things going on, but those are the main internet facing things. So if you're in southwestern Oklahoma and you need IT work, you can call me for that too. But I doubt there's a huge overlap between that and your audience.
I'm sure there'll be at least one.
That's fine.
Anyway, my main channel is Brody Robertson. I do Linux videos there 6 days a week. Go check that out. I don't know what'll be out there by the time this comes out. I've got the gaming channel, Brody on Games. I stream there twice a week, Thursday, Friday, 10 a.m. Adelaide time. Right now I'm playing through Black Myth Wukong and Kingdom Hearts 3. So that's fun. I've got the React channel where I upload just random clips from the stream. So if you want to just watch clips and just watch me not at all have any idea what I'm talking about when I watch a video and just say random things, that's also good. And if you're listening to the audio version of this, you can find the video version on YouTube at Tech Over Tea. If you'd like to find the audio release, it is on basically every podcast platform, and there's an RSS feed, so put in your favorite app. I'll give you the final word. How do you want to sign us off? I never tell people they're doing this. It's always fun to see what they do.
Okay. Well, I mean, let's see. I kind of want to borrow the Critical Role thing and be excellent to each other. That's a pretty good bit of advice. Look at the code, write good code, and happy meshing.